Hey dudes, we are talking today about this knife here. This is the Kaya by Kizer. It's not the Kizer knife. I haven't been on a Kizer buying binge. Don't worry, I did buy the T1, which was reviewed recently. My buddy Mark bought this. Now Mark sniped this from an Australian sale on Xtac for 150 Australian dollars. Seeing as the knife retails at Knife Center for 180 US dollars, he's almost gone and got himself a half price knife. So he's bought it, had it sent to me, and then I'll send it on to him once I've reviewed it, which is really now that I've done this video. So let's have a look at the Kizer Kaya. Open it there for you. Let's have a good old look at it. Polarizing design, isn't it? Not probably something that I would have looked at and said, oh, that's for me, but obviously it does appeal to some folks because it appealed to Mark, and unless he was just buying it because it is also just a great mix of good value materials for such a good price. But who knows? Polarizing design at any rate. Anyhow, what I'll be doing now is putting up the specs. They'll be in millimeters because I actually made these specs myself. I got a little measuring tape out and I measured all the different parts of the knife. I've included in there the handle grip area as well, as requested by a fellow in my last video's comments, so there you go, as well as all the other stuff, thickness and weight and whatnot. So that's how big we're looking. Now, that never quite does it for me. I always like to see my knives in reviews up against other knives. So let's roll to a whole batch of size comparisons. Here's the Kaya with a Victorinox standard size Swiss Army knife and an Opinel number 8 or 9, I think. I think it's a number 9. So some pretty standard size comparisons that you may be used to. Here it is next to two other Kizers, the Begleiter, or Begleiter, whatever, and the Gemini. So the Begleiters, or Begleiter, this knife is a bit of a larger knife than the Gemini, and it's sort of about the same size as the Kaya, although I reckon if you straighten the Kaya out a bit, it'll probably be a little bit longer. This is it with a cold steel American Lawman and the Mini Lawman. It's a 2.5 inch blade, 3.5 inch blade. This is it next to the T1, which is my favourite Kizer, reviewed recently. A little bit bigger than the T1, and a little bit thicker as well. I'll show you the thickness shots in a couple of more frames. And this is it with the Police 4 and the Hardcore Hardware MILF number 4. Two more extremes, this being a longer blade, much bigger, and this being a much chunkier blade there. Let's look at the thickness. Righty, thickness wise, you've got the Hardcore Hardware here. This is the Kaya. This is the American Lawman, this is the T1, and this is the Police. That's an about descending thickness from the very, very thick MILF to the still quite thick Kaya, down towards the quite thin and slicey Police. Alrighty, so now for the review. What do I like and what do I don't like about the knife? Let's talk the Kizer Kaya. So you get quite a big sort of stout looking blade there on the Kaya. So this one's a little bit thicker than the one on the TI. It is... to my measurements, it's 3.4 millimeters. To the sights, it's 3.3. But anyway, much of a muchness. However, it's a little bit thicker, a little tiny bit taller, and it cuts a little bit less acutely than the TI did. If you remember my review of the TI, it was a particularly good cutter. This is still a very, very good cutter. They're very, capable and able, because they've given it a nice tall flat grind to get all the way down to that cutting edge. And yeah, as such, when I do sort of my push cutting on the rope, it does do that rather easily without having to saw too much, apart from just speeding it up. So not the best cutter in the world, but still much better than a lot of other knives that I've had. Say, for example, while we're still on Kizer, better than the Kizer Begleiter, for example. That thing didn't cut particularly well at all. Had too much of a heavy shoulder behind that cutting edge. So anyway, the edges and the blade is done very, very well in terms of performance. I like the shape, got a nice flat area here. Some slight factory recurving. I'm not sure if that's intentional. Very, very slight. Will probably come out if you sharpen it, a little bit heavier down here. Regardless, it's nothing major. I like this anyway. Good sort of woodworking area there, and then a nice little belly, and then another sort of almost flat area here. So, getting your flats for, push cutting, whatever. So yeah, well done design, good blade overall. It's made of S35 VN, which is becoming sort of like the industry standard good blade steel. Most companies kind of default back to S35 VN. Unless you're Benchmade is still hanging on S30V for a lot of their stuff. But Really like ZT, Kaiser, WE knives. Even Spyderco are doing a fair bit of S35 VN. Cold Steel is even using it now, so it's definitely taken off. And this one, it is a really good steel. So it's highly rust resistant. It's got a pretty good workability to it. So say for this, I did all my testing and I carried it for about a week, 5 days, 6 days or so. I didn't want to completely destroy it because it's not going to be my knife, and I'm sending it off in still pretty much factory identical condition, because all I had to really do to get the edge crazy sharp again was to strop it after all my testing, and it is back to being, you know, hair shaving sharp. Nice, good edge, good blade, good steel. All wins up here, except for one thing that I'll talk about later. The handle is very, very ergonomic. It's one of the more comfortable handles. I think when you steer the handle downwards like that, it's sort of, I don't know, it goes well in most grips that I find. So very, very secure, a good way to have a handle without putting a huge dramatic parrot speak on the end. Good way to have a handle lock into the hand for, you know, pressure going this way rather than just, you know, pressure going this way, which the flipper's obviously going to stop. So that's good. It's a really ergonomic handle and it feels really good in the hand. All these waves and stuff are quite pleasing, quite tactile, quite nice indeed. There's some jimping, which your thumb goes about halfway up. If you had huge hands, it might go all the way up to the top. But yeah, it's definitely a nicely done handle in the hand, for sure. The pocket clip you can swap either side, which is nice, often with the sculpted or stylized pocket clips, although this one is really just a sprung piece of metal. The clips you often can't swap, but this one you can. They've even polished off the same area on the other side. Some might argue that they would have rather just have a display side and a clip side, but there you go. So I like the handle, how it feels in my hand for sure. Another great thing is just the general build of this knife. Kaiser haven't had many problems with me at all in terms of build quality. Apart from in the T1, the screw gradually works itself out, very gradually, but I just had to Loctite that because they obviously didn't do that at the factory. I'm seeing how the knife makers might be getting mixed messages from the knife community, because we are sort of all about the no Loctite, let us take our knives apart. Kaiser's got some flack for soft screws, so I can sort of see how they might have said, you know what, fuck them, they can put it in Loctite themselves. So yeah, anyway, so they had that on the T1 and that was really it. So this knife's really well built, well put together. Everything is centered, everything is in line, the lockup is strong, no problems at all whatsoever. And of course, being a ball bearing flipper knife from Kaiser, the action is excellent. This is without any oil. I haven't treated this. I'll let Mark treat his knife with whatever oils he wants to treat it with, but even still, just from the factory, with whatever they use, it's flips open every time, drops sharp with a couple of little loose shakes. So very, very nice indeed. Nicely put together knife. So does everything you want a good sort of Kaiser flipper to do. It's titanium, good flipping action, you know, drops sharp, all that good stuff. No problems whatsoever. So yeah, I like a lot about this knife. It is a good buy, especially for the price that Mark's paid for it. A little bit on the pricier side, usually I would suggest. But yeah, as I said at the start, it is going to be a bit polarizing too. So you might just look at this and say, nah, not for me. One thing I guess I'll start getting into things I'm not super happy on. One thing I will note is that I'm not the biggest fan of the flipper tab. It's kind of just this big square. It's quite large. It's not the end of the world, but I think what's happening with me is, and this is more of a me thing than a knife thing, I think I'm kind of going off flipping knives. I don't know, I think it's sort of run its course with me a little bit. The TI was such a nice thumb stud opener that I think I'm sort of off the... Sorry, I had to go see my boy. So yeah, I think I'm just going off flippers is what I was saying. I don't think I need the show of a flipper. I don't think I'm particularly that fussed about the fun of them anymore either, because you know what, with a well done thumb stud knife you can have the same amount of fun. So that's the one. So I guess that's the first thing, but that's just me. That's no fault of the knife. I guess that's this reviewer's, you know, personal thoughts. The first main thing I'm not particularly fond of is the pocket clip. The pocket clip to me is just a little bit shallow in the pocket, a little bit sort of not too fond of the branding. I'm just not that fond of how it looks. And a lot of things are down to taste. So of course this whole knife is a down to taste knife very much. This isn't like a Sebenza that just looks overall nice and basic. It's definitely got some jazz to it. So if you're going to like the look of the handle, you may well like the look of the clip. I don't mind the look of the handle, but I'm just not fond of that clip at all. It's cool that it's reversible, but just in terms of how it acts as well, I would rather have had something a little bit deeper. I would love Kizer to really make their own deep carry clip that they can just put on all their general knives. I don't really see one just yet. So that's one thing I'm not super fond of, is the clip. The main thing I don't love about this knife is this opening, or this hole here in the blade. It is milled out as if you can open with it, but then opening holes with flippers, it's tricky to do it without the flipper. There you go, I could do it then, but you have to really crane your hand back, and then you can open it like that, which is fine. But if you just do it as normal, then the flipper tab always rubs up against your finger. It just seems a bit silly. Either have a flipper or have a thumb stud or a thumb hole. You don't need to have both. It's like when knives put thumb studs on their flipping knives as well. It just doesn't do it for me, and I think the hole makes the blade look a bit uglier. I reckon it'd be a nicer looking blade without it, or they could have had it a bit narrower along here and perhaps thinned it out a bit, but then that'd be altering the whole design of the knife. Just not fond of that. I just think it's busy enough down this end. You could do with just having a bit more of a plain looking blade, and it's kind of like a whole sort of angry eye looking thing, just not for me. So that's the main thing I don't like, and just functionally, it's just not such a necessity that they couldn't have just left it off. So that's the main thing I'm not super fond of about this knife. The rest of it is really just going to come down to a matter of whether you like this sort of thing and whether you like this kind of pistol grip style handle or not. I'm indifferent to it, to be honest. A bit of a shrug about the general appearance. What I can say is that if the general appearance talks to you greatly, then the rest of the knife is really well made, so you're going to enjoy all the other attributes. It's something that if you like the look of it, you'll like the feel of it and how it works once you get it into your hand, which I guess is really all you need to know from me. Because like a couple of other knives I've had on recently, like the Hardcore Hardware MILF and things like that, where it is a bit polarizing, it's just more about me assuring you that everything's in order and it all works well and the materials are good and the steel seems to hold an edge and the action's fine and it doesn't sort of fall apart after a couple of days of just incessant playing with on the couch. So that's really kind of what this review is more to fill you in on. Yeah, I'd love a slightly thinner blade. I'd love it to cut like the Kizer T1, but then that's the Kizer T1 and this is the Kizer Kaya. And it is still a very good, albeit perhaps slightly too jazzy knife. So thanks for watching my review, dudes. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.